components now. One is like the setup, like these steps to actually get things running. So you can see that in the setup file, what we have is like delete from S3. So basically, if you already have an S3 bucket, uh, then delete the contents of it, right? Then the next thing is delete the database. This will throw an error if you're deleting a database that doesn't exist. You can see that delete DB looks at your glue database, right, which then it gets from settings. And then from there, write restaurants. So this is the list of, the restaurants that you'll be scraping or using the API to pull information from. So for write restaurants, you can see this calls this write LLCs from the restaurant LLCs. So let's just take a look at this. So this, here's the restaurant LLCs, and then it calls to Parquet. And you can see I have a separate LLC path this time like a path just for storing these names essentially. The reason why is because I didn't want to use like partition data with storing all the API information, right, like the receipts and all that JSON, and then have non-partition data, just file data, right, for this list. Like there seems to be like issues if you kind of use the data set true, right, meaning like you're treating something as the entire folder in one case and then treating something as individual files in the other. And in this case, you're just writing this as an individual file. So you can see this LLC path is just defined in the environment file. And I'm just literally, just to be safe, I'm just literally putting this in a totally different folder than where I'm storing everything else. This way it's not conflicting with one another. Okay, so what do we do? Delete from S3, delete the database, write the list of restaurants, and then make sure that this works, just like read the list of restaurants from S3. And then find all receipts and coerce. So this both will go through each of the LLCs, right? So the list of LLCs, call find all receipts for it, right? Which probably hits our API and returns a data frame. And then let me go back. Yeah, so it hits that. Here's my setup. Okay, so we go through each of the LLCs. We get the data frame of those LLCs by hitting the API, converting it to a data frame. This concat will then stack those data frames. All right. So basically, if you imagine that you have a list of data frames, df1, df2, one for each one of these restaurant names, okay? And then we want to combine this into one data frame. That's what concat will do. And then this coerce df, what this does is our information's coming back as strings. So what we want to do is convert this as much as possible into numeric data, right? So that's why what we're doing is we're kind of selecting all the numerical columns, and then .apply will go through the apply method. If you remember, that goes through each column in the data frame and converts it to be or it goes through each column and then applies the function here. So in this case, it goes through each column and it will call the toNumeric function on each column that's selected here. Then we do the same thing with the date time data. Okay. Then I don't know why we dropped the combined columns. Oh, these are the columns that we just kind of coerced. We want to drop the original ones and then add in the coerced ones. So basically we just want to replace the coerced columns with the original. And then I just rename a column here, or make these things shorter, and finally return the data frame. And then you can go to the setup.py and finally write the data to S3. Then from there, so now all we did, right, we cleaned things up. We deleted our S3 bucket, or deleted the contents of it. We deleted the database. We wrote the list of restaurants. We then read those restaurants from S3. We then hit the API for each one of those restaurants and coerce the data. Okay, so that gives us back a large data frame. And then we're writing that data frame to S3. I think we actually could do like an overwrite here if you want it. It doesn't really matter because we delete the database originally anyway. And then finally we do create the GlueDB. So what this will do is, right, this will crawl our database to then and create this table like receipts. So then we can select this, call our Athena query when we want to like do select all from receipts, where, whatever. So that's what this does. This will crawl the database. So we can see this in action. If I do Python 3 setup.py, this will probably give me just one initial error. That's fine, which is that this database, and I think this might be fine, right? Because if the database exists, then the delete will work fine. So it's taking a minute. You can kind of get a sense of what's happening here. My guess is hitting the API. What I would look at, let me see if we go to, I want to show you soon like a bug that I ran into yesterday. I think is kind of tricky. So where's this? Should this be written to? Let's take a look. It should be written to here, the Jigsaw Texas Receipts 2024. All right. And you can see this is partitioning by the obligation end date, right? And why is that? Let's just think about where that would be occurring from. That should be coming from this function, right? Right to S3. If you look at that, the partition columns is the obligation end date, right? The data set equals true means that when you read and write to it, right, we're treating this whole bucket essentially as a single file, and then we're partitioning it. Let me show you. So this ran successfully. The next step, if you wanted to, right, there was no error here. The next step is then you can call the flow.py. All right. So what will that do? That will read the restaurants. So what does that mean? It means it goes to S3 to read the list of restaurants, and then it goes through each one of those LLCs, calls find and coerce, meaning it hits the API, coerces, returns the data frame, converts the columns that it can to to be numeric or datetime. And then this .any is to see like if there are any present values, right? If this whole data frame is not full of null values, then write to S3, right? Write the data frame to S3, which uses that same function to call this write to S3. And then mode is append, right? This way it does not overwrite the existing data, but rather, appends to it. Okay, so we can try this. So the first thing we did was just did Python 3 setup.py. In order for this to work, you'll need to first put in the .env. So you'll need this S3 path. You'll need your name of your Glue database. And then, I did a totally separate bucket, right? This is one bucket. I said, here's a separate bucket and specified just down to the file name where the list of LLCs will be stored. Right, so you can, we could show you that too. But anyway, the next thing to do is call Python 3 flow.py. This will take a while, but you can start to see it running. The reason why, so the read restaurants, that step completed. Let's go to the flow file. Right, that one's pretty quick. We basically just read the list of restaurants from that Parquet file. Then we want to go through each of the LLC names and call find and coerce, Well, what does that do? That goes through, that calls a task to basically hit the API and coerce it. And you're going to see this task being run many times. So you see the write to S3 completed, and now you're going to see write to S3 1. Why is that? Because it's happening for every, this process is happening for each one of the LSCs. So here's find and coerce 2, right? And now it finished that, and now write to S3 2. And now find and coerce 3, right? Because we're looping through for each name in the LLCs perform this. So this is now, appending to each one of them if there was any data to actually append, right, and partitioning. Okay, any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to show you like a crazy little bug that I ran into yesterday. All right, let me show you a little bug. So I did change this earlier, but I guess I was working with a piece of code or like a code base where I forgot to, anyway, I did not have this change. So let me just show you the bug. So if I go to settings, no, I'll go to setup, and it's in this find and coerce, find all, coerce df. And then here, originally what I had was format. If you do this PD to date time, I think it was here. Yeah. Let's look at this. Pandas to date time format. Yeah, format example. Okay, so this is what I originally had, was something like this. And what this does is kind of like, remember, we're trying to take a string and convert it to a datetime object. So one option is that you can specify, right, like the format that the string is coming in, and then tell you, how do you read it, right? So this is saying like the month, you can expect the string to have the month first, followed by a slash, then the day, then the year, then a space, etc. So I had something like that originally, and I need a quotation mark here. Okay, so this is what I originally had. So now let's run this again. Let's run this setup.py file again. And this is, I'm surprised this doesn't throw. Oh no, yeah, this will be fine. So this is deleting the database, and okay, it broke. So let's think about what happened here. So the first thing is, this is, we see a bunch of mess here that we basically don't understand, right? Because this is part of my Wrangler package, right? This is an error in my Wrangler package. This is an error in my Wrangler package, right? It's not the Wrangler package that's messed up, it's us. So now we finally see our issue, which is line 16 in migrations, and that's happening from create GlueDB. And you can see the error is list index is out of range. So for whatever reason, if we go to line 25, I can just click on this, right? It's not actually creating the database, and this line is to crawl the data set. And you see this list index out of range, which means typically like somehow it says schemas. So this probably means like for whatever reasons we don't have a schema. Even though we're trying to crawl our S3 bucket and produce a table, right, that receipts table, it's not producing any. So why would that be? It's probably the case because we're not, when we try to crawl that bucket, maybe that bucket doesn't have any data in it. So let's take a look. We're going to refresh this bucket. And that's the case, right? So you see that all of a sudden our bucket doesn't have any data, which is crazy because what we said to do is to, we delete the bucket here, but then we say find all receipts and coerce these LLC names. So this is what I was running into yesterday, right? And so how would I solve this? So the first thing I would do is basically break this up right? Like the first thing I want to do is see, like, am I actually getting a list of data frames, right? Is this data frame, does it have anything here? Right? Are we getting any present data here? Okay. And actually, we can do that. Here's find all receipts and coerce. I think I would put this right here. Put a breakpoint here and see, does this return a data frame for me? And if it does, right, then we should be writing test 3. So let's take a look at this. Okay, so now we hit this breakpoint and we want to see, like, do we actually have data here? So I can just type in, all receipts. And this looks like we have data, right? So then I would kind of like go here and see, okay, can I write this? We know this isn't going to work. So at this point, what we could do is just try to do this one by one. So you can see that's what I'm doing, is I wrote out here, okay, I'm just going to have all receipts, right? That's what I want to, that's this thing. All receipts. Here's the path, right? I'm removing every single bit of abstraction that I can, right? Like I'm not using even variables. Mode is overwrite. Data set equals true. Partition by the obligation end date. So let's just, this way it's nothing's abstract. So we'll just literally concretely plug this thing in. Wrangler's not defined, so import AWS Wrangler as WR. And now let's call this. And that looked way too fast, and notice it's not saying anything was actually written. So this is really annoying. So then what would I do next? The next thing is to make it simpler, right? Like, let's just try to get anything written. So how would we make, how do we make something like this simpler? Like, what can we potentially do? For me, the thing that came in mind, like anything here that's optional that could make this simpler, right? For me, the thing that came in mind was this part. Like, could I get this written without partitioning the data? And that worked, right? So we are able to get this written without partitioning the data. And at that point, I was like, okay, maybe I'll just give up and we won't partition the data. But, we could look at it. Like, it's not partitioned by obligation end date. What if we partition by another column? So let's see if we can do that. So let's do all, what was the name of this thing? All receipts dot columns. And let's partition by location number, or see if we can. So this time we'll do partition columns equals here, and here we'll do location number, and press return. The reason why I'm going through this, right, is because, like, we're about to, we're going to have to work with complicated systems, and then it just becomes a process of debugging. Notice that this is taking a lot longer, right, which gives me hope that this is actually working. Let's refresh and see if we're getting anything. You see that? So this is working. So now this tells us, right, this is like pretty hopeful, because this means that probably it's not like we understand this incorrectly. There's something wrong with the obligation end date. So let's take a look at that. So we'll do all receipts, obligation end date. I forget if that's the name of it. Oh, there we go. And look, this is all our values here. Is that it's not a time. Let's take a, is that the unique set of values? All receipts. Oops, I need to do it like that. Yeah, so we only get one value here, and it's this not a time value. So if we're partitioning by it, I guess that's not going to work. So why is this occurring? Like, why? Now that's the next question, is like, why are all these values not a time? And, you could think, like, do they start off that way, right? So you could go back. But basically, at that point, I was able to figure it out that we would go to, let's go back to the setup, find all receipts and coerce. Right, the issue was in this coerce df part that we have this format equals the month, day, year, and that's leading us to a data frame where all these values are not a time. Whereas if we remove this, okay, then, and we call the setup.py again, right, then we can, in this function, you'll see that the column here, it should actually be our date times. So let's take a look. Let's put a breakpoint. Entity not called. Oh, it says, so this is the error. An error entity called when calling the delete database operation, database revenue tracker not found. This is just this line right here, right? And I tell you if this exists, then comment it out. That's fine, right? Because it will now just create it. Okay, cool. So now let's take a look at all receipts. And we want to look at, let's do .columns, because we want to look at that obligation end date column. And you can see now we have present values, right? So again, like, how do we figure this out? Basically, it's the same way we always debug. You know, we go to get as close as possible to the location of the error. So for us, we first saw that, hey, this is returning data, find all receipts and coerce, but we're not writing to S3. So then the next question was like, well, what if I like try to write it out, not even use this function, but try to explicitly tell it to write to S3? Okay, that didn't work. Okay, what if we make it simpler? So remove the partition column. That worked. Now we try to get closer to what we were trying to accomplish. What if we use a different partition column? That worked. Okay, so now we knew it was something with our data, right? And then you can narrow it down even more and be like, well, where is our data getting messed up, right? So it's like, the next question for me might be, is it getting messed up when we come back from here, right? And if you looked at this, you would see, no, there it works fine. The problem is in the coercing, okay? So the problem was here in the coercing, and then you could kind of see where are we coercing that column. It's right here, right? And that's what's breaking it. Okay, so it's like it is just a process of finding exactly the line, right? Repeatedly finding the line where things are working to where things are not working. And then once you find that line, then going to see like, okay, even if this line isn't working, where in this line is it not working, right? And then once you find that, then you're on your way. Okay, so what I'd want you to do is to actually set this up, right? Again, all it should take is filling in these three things. You could even use mine. I don't think you can use mine because we couldn't get the permission set up, but otherwise that would be fine. But it's just creating a bucket, creating two different buckets. And here, you're just specifying, I'll leave my information in here. Here specifying the bucket, here specifying a file, then calling setup.py, Python3 setup.py, right? And then calling the flow.py function. From there, if you're able to get that working, there's a couple things you can do. One is to, start playing with this, like start trying to understand how this works better. The other thing would be to start trying to implement this. What I want to do is in the second half of today, like after a couple hours, move into some LLM stuff. So here we're pulling data that's, numeric, right? Like how many receipts were sold. But I want to show you like a more interesting application potentially, which would be like if we pull down text data and then feed that to an LLM. I won't use Prefect for that. We'll take one thing at a time. But, if for your project, eventually to spend time on a project, it would be pretty interesting to set up a pipeline that stores some text data and then feed that to an LLM, right, which you can then ask questions of. Okay, so I want to first give you some time to feel like you understand this a little bit better, and then we can move into LLM stuff later on. Questions about this? Anything else that I should review about this? All right. This is, I would say reclone this. So it's located here, right? And it's in the main branch. You can see I just, I just updated this last night. So you can just do git clone, set up the .env file, then run python3 setup.py, then run python3 flow.py. I think at that point it will work. Build LLM pipelines. So, it just takes a little bit. It's not too bad, but it does take a little bit in terms of understanding what that means. I think the main thing is understanding how you can use LLMs. Not really, there's there's engineering involved, but some of it's a little bit more conceptual. So you'll see, we'll start integrating LLMs into our pipelines, and I think that you'll be able to really just lean on your Python skills in order to do this. So let me show you, I guess, what we can do. So for me, I have a ChatGPT account. Let me just, so you can kind of go to chat. Just go to OpenAI, and then I'll click on it. If you don't have one, you still just have to click on login, and that will allow you to sign up if you don't have an account. And then I'll click on API. All right, and then you can see these various kind of components right here. A lot of it's documentation, right? Whatever these words mean. And then further on, let's see. The API key is what I'm looking for. API keys. Okay, so I just hovered over this part, and then you can see there's API keys here. There's also settings. So with settings, you will need to, and I can give you access actually to my API key during this class, and then you can use that if you want. If you want to use your own though, you have to go to settings, and then there's billing, and so you'll have to add, some credit balance. You can see, I've been playing around with, ChatGPT's API over the past week or so, and obviously working with all the labs. I spent 50 cents on everything. So you can basically just use the cheapest available credit. So I think $5 is the cheapest. Just use $5, and that'll be plenty. From there, then you can go to your API keys, and then click on Create New Key. So I'll call this, lab key. Click on Create Key, and then copy this. And now this is just our API key. Then I can plug this into here. All right, so you can see what I'm doing is I'm just using the OpenAI library. All right, and then over here, we create a client. So this is the OpenAI client, right? This makes sense because the client's what hits the API, right? And we're passing through the API key right here. I'll comment this out for now. So now the next thing, this is the Python interface for making a request to the API. And what you do is you pass through a few pieces of information. One is the model, the specific model that you're using. I think you all are kind of familiar with this, right? They've trained originally ChatGPT 3, and then it went up to 4, right? For us, the main difference is actually the length of the question you get to ask is a lot larger with 4 than with 3. But for right now, 3.5, this works fine. So you can see, also if you want to look at this a little bit more, you can see, take a look at here. You see these various models that you can use. Again, we're using just 3.5 Turbo for right now. And then there's these two different kind of components, right, with these messages. So you always are providing two messages. One is is for the system, and the other is as the user. So for the system, you kind of say like almost like the persona it takes on. You are a helpful assistant. You could, tweak this beyond this, like say like, knowledge about like Python or whatever. If this is something specific for Python, assume that you know that you are a developer, something like that. If that's what you're trying to do, this is fine. You can probably see other examples of what you can pass through for there. And then this is the question that we'll be asking ChatGPT. All right. So let's just say like, what does AWS Glue actually do? Okay. And then let's actually, what we'll do at that point, let's just run this. What I'll have to do probably, if we run this, we're going to probably see an error that I just didn't install a library yet, unless I have it on my computer. Okay, actually it's fine. So you saw it took a second. We asked a question. Then if I look at the completion, you can see like kind of what comes back here is this is a chat completion object, right? This is a Python object. And then we have this choices. So it gives you multiple different kind of responses potentially. And then we have choices. And we'll select the first choice, right? Because we asked the question. We're going to get the first choice out of it. And then we'll get the message, choices.message, right? You can see these different things. Okay, and then .content. All right, and now this is kind of the answer that we can have. So if we want to kind of create AWS Glue as a fully managed ETL that helps us load data for analytics, create ETL jobs for this, blah, blah. Automating discovery, data cleansing, normalization with different sources. So that's pretty good. So if you want to make this like more of a chatbot, right, then we can print this out. And then from here, the next thing we can do is just do like an input and then have the question. And this will say like add your question here. All right. Let me just run this. This is pretty obvious. Okay, so add your question here. Why is the sky blue? And now what happens is that it's going to provide the question to here, right? So as the user, we're asking this question, and now it will get back the response from here, select the first choice, and then print out the message content. Okay, the sky appears blue because of blah, blah. All right, so this is kind of like the first step to working with ChatGPT. One thing that you probably know is that with ChatGPT, you can't really, and with any of these models, you cannot get like up-to-date information really, at least not out of the box. So like, for example, we can't ask, anything about the news, right? And that might be something that we want to do. We obviously, we can't ask it like private information, right? Like things internal to my company. That might be something that we want to do, right? We might only want to consider like certain information on the web and say like, do something like that. So let's work with like, if you want to get, like, let's say up-to-date information, right? So what you'll want to do oftentimes is provide what's called like a context. So you say like provide a context. So what does that mean? What we'll do is here, we'll call this the prompt. And basically with our prompt, we'll do two things. One is we'll have the question, right? And that can be like, my question. And this can be, so here we'll do, did the Flyers win? The Flyers that's a hockey team. And this will be an F string. And then we'll provide the context. All right, and then the context, what I did was I just copied a news article talking about the Flyers. All right. And then what we'll do is we can just import that here. We could have copied and pasted it, we'll just say like from context, import context, and then we'll put that here. And now normally, right, like ChatGPT, if we ask it like, did the Flyers win? It could not answer that question, like last night. It wouldn't be able to answer that question. But if we put it in context, then it can probably look at this and take the question and know that, okay, I can look at this information in order to find the answer. No, the Flyers did not win the game mentioned in the context. The New Jersey Devils won the game against the Philadelphia Flyers. You can provide, like if you want to, you can like say like, please answer the question below and summarize and provide additional information in 2 to 3 sentences. All right, so this is a very like typical kind of technique, right? Where what you'll do is you'll not just use the information, right, that GPT was trained with, but you'll provide additional information to the prompt, and then you'll ask ChatGPT to basically use that information in answering the question. And this may seem like simple enough, right? But this is like basically always the kind of pattern that you'll use. And this has a fancy name, which is called RAG, and that stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. In other words, the generation of text, we are augmenting, right, our text generation by retrieving additional data, right, by first retrieving additional data. So if you think about what we're doing, step 1 was just like provide a prompt or provide a question into ChatGPT. Right? That's kind of step 1. But then instead what we did was we provided a question, and then instead of directly going to ChatGPT, we first went to an outside resource, like the internet, and then provide the context, the question, and the context to ChatGPT. All right? So we're basically showing ChatGPT the information we want when it answers the question, right? Along with the question. Now, step 1 will be to like go to the internet, right? We're gonna, in the next lab, we'll use like the Google News API to, pull information, pull out some relevant data, and go to the internet to do that. But typically, with the RAG pipeline, what you'll do is you'll go this will be a database. You'll go to a vector database, and this will have a bunch of text files. All right, so let's say, let's say like you wanted to, like this might be like an example might be like maybe it's like medical information, right? And this is trying to assist doctors. Like maybe it's like, back doctors. So I have a bunch of like medical journal information here. And each one of these might represent different articles or pieces of articles. What we'll need to do is someone will ask their question, and then somehow we're going to have to find the relevant articles from our database and give that as our context to ChatGPT. Now, currently, we're just using Google, right? Google's pretty good at, we give it a question, it gives us back, right, the top 3 articles, and we provide that to ChatGPT. But eventually, right, we're going to want to use our own database, right, because we're going to want to make sure, like, hey, if we're providing medical information, this is accurate medical information, it's of a certain quality, right? Maybe we want to, like, clean it a little bit first, obviously validate it, things like that. So that problem is more challenging, because you're going to need to know, of all these articles, which of the 3 or which of the 5 or which of the 10, but not all of them, which of them do we need to select to provide to ChatGPT. Okay, and we'll get into that next. That involves using like a vector database, but it's just not a straightforward question. right? It's not straightforward to be like, here's my question, here's the 3 related articles, and let's provide that to ChatGPT. But that is the pipeline. When people say like a RAG pipeline, that's what they're talking about. The user provides a question. We then need to go to the vector to a database that has essentially text, different articles there, and we need to find the relevant articles and then provide that to ChatGPT or the LLM, whatever LLM it is, and then given that content, that relevant content and the question, it will send back an answer. And that is like the pipeline. All right, if you understand that, that's really understanding a RAG pipeline. Questions about this. What's going to be next is basically like play around with this, right? Then like I said, we'll use the Google News API. So that basically you should be able to ask a question just like in general, and then it will hit the Google News API, give us back the context, the relevant context, and then from there you'll provide the question along with the context to ChatGPT, and it can provide you like an up-to-date answer. Questions about this? Cool. All right, let me show you what's next. And I'll send you my API keys if you want to use them. So I'll deploy this. You can play around with the chatbot and then work on this Google News thing, and then we'll probably get here maybe after the break. We'll see how long this lab takes. All right, but either way, I wanted to show this to you so that you could start to see like what you can use as a project to like start having Prefect maybe pull in some text, etc. And you can start maybe looking around at some sample projects to use with LLMs.